Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a fundamental challenge: how we make sense of the tidal wave of complex information that washes over us daily.
It's a lot, isn't it?
It really is. Our mission, as always, is to give you a shortcut to being truly well-informed, extracting those critical insights and surprising facts that just stick with you.
And for this particular deep dive, we're tackling a very specific, yet I think universally applicable challenge. We're going to explore 10 fundamental techniques,
10 of them.
10 core ones, yeah, used across various fields, especially in business analysis. But honestly, they're applicable to any situation where you need to cut through complexity.
Right.
These are tools designed to help you navigate ambiguity, achieve clear outcomes, and genuinely grasp what's essential. Understanding and applying these techniques is key, really, to gaining knowledge quickly, but thoroughly, no matter what your background or area of interest might be.
That's precisely it. Our source material today is, well, it's a comprehensive guide to these practical techniques, and we're going to unpack each one with clarity, engaging details, and hopefully just enough humor to keep you hooked.
Let's try.
Imagine for a moment you're tasked with revamping, say, a decades-old customer service system at a global company. Let's call it Nexus Global for today.
Okay, Nexus Global. Got it.
Every technique we explore today is a tool you'd pull from your belt for just such a challenge. Okay, let's unpack this and see what truly matters for you. Let's kick things off with our first powerful technique: scope modeling.
A foundational one.
Definitely. I mean, think about how often projects, initiatives, or even just ambitious ideas kind of suffer because their boundaries aren't clear.
Oh, constantly. It's like trying to build that new wing onto Nexus Global's headquarters without knowing where your property line actually ends.
It's a chaos,
Right.
exactly.
Total
Yeah.
chaos. So the core purpose of scope modeling is exactly that: to define the nature of one or more limits or boundaries, and then critically, to clearly place elements inside or outside those boundaries.
Right, drawing the line.
Yes, drawing the lines. It's about creating a clear container for your work or analysis, giving everyone involved a shared understanding of the playing field.
And the description of this technique really highlights its versatility. We're not just talking about, physical limits here.
No, not at all.
Scope models are commonly used to describe the boundaries of control, like what Nexus Global is responsible for, or what's internal versus external to their customer service department.
Or the scope of change.
Yes, the change you're trying to enact, the boundaries of a solution you're proposing, or even the limits of a specific need you're trying to address for a customer.
The force notes that these models can also delimit any simple boundary, which is an interesting distinction from more complex, less predictable ideas like horizons or emergent properties.
Talk a bit more about those horizons and emergent properties.
Sure. So horizons, in this context, they refer to boundaries completely dependent on a stakeholder's position or perspective. Think about the perceived limit of what a customer service rep can or should do.
Right, which might be totally different from what their manager thinks.
Exactly. It varies wildly.
Yeah.
And emergent properties are those unpredictable outcomes that arise from simple interactions within a complex system. The boundary isn't fixed. It sort of shifts as new behaviors emerge. Pinning those down is a whole different ballgame than defining a simple boundary.
Okay, got it. And when it comes to illustrating these boundaries, the models can show elements in three main ways, right?
That's right. 3 ways. First, in scope, where the model identifies a boundary from the inside and shows the elements contained by it.
Like a functional decomposition, breaking down a big function.
Precisely, like breaking down the customer query resolution function at Nexus Global into its subfunctions. Then there's out of scope, where the boundary is seen from the outside, identifying elements not contained.
So like a context diagram showing external systems.
Yeah, maybe showing external CRM systems interacting with Nexus Global's new customer service solution, but they aren't actually part of the solution itself.
Okay.
And the third is both, where the model identifies the boundary from both sides, showing elements both inside and outside. A Venn diagram is a classic example.
Or a use case model, maybe.
Which we'll get to later.
Exactly, showing interactions across a system boundary. So when we talk about understanding boundaries, the source really drills down into 4 specific types.
4 types, okay.
Scope of control, clarifying what you're analyzing; roles, internal, external to Nexus Global; scope of need, focusing on stakeholder needs;
Right.
the value to be delivered by the new system; functional areas;
Makes sense?
scope of solution, what requirements are met; value delivered, the impact; and finally, scope of change, zeroing in on specific actions affected stakeholders, like those customer service agents, or the events to cause or prevent.
And these models aren't just diagrams, are they?
No, they're typically a combination. Diagrams, matrices, textual explanations
Uh-huh.
often describe per phase or iteration if your project rolls out in stages.
Right, right. Okay, moving into the elements of scope modeling, the source highlights that the primary objectives are to clarify the span of control, the relevance of various elements, and crucially, where effort will be applied.
Yeah.
So, what does this all mean for someone trying to get clear on a project like our Nexus Global Customer Service revamp?
Well, it means you're intentionally carving out the space where your work truly matters, where resources will actually be invested. It focuses the effort.
And that brings us directly to scope of change and context.
Exactly. For a business analyst, this process is concerned with all the elements going to be altered by the change, say, new customer interaction protocols in Nexus Global,
Uh-huh.
but also relevant external elements, like how changes to the customer-facing website might impact the customer service system. You have to think about the ripples.
So, for stuff inside the scope,
The BA defines how those elements will be modified. For elements outside the scope but still relevant, they focus on defining the interactions.
it sounds quite comprehensive.
It is. A good scope model considers all the moving parts. Business processes, new capabilities, specific technologies, information assets, even the individual stakeholders affected. It's truly holistic.
Which leads directly to the idea of level of detail. You don't want to get lost in the weeds too early.
Definitely not. The purpose of your analysis defines the right level of abstraction. You need to hit that sweet spot. Reduce uncertainty meaningfully, but without falling into analysis paralysis.
Ah, yes, analysis paralysis, the enemy of progress.
Indeed. It's like planning that road trip. You need the destination and major stops, but mapping out every single pothole before you leave. You'll never get started.
Good analogy. So how do you manage that level of detail?
Well, elements can be described by simply listing them, or by referring to a specific level of their decomposition hierarchy, like saying all sub-processes under order fulfillment, instead of listing every single one.
We're grouping them.
Yeah, grouping them into logically bound sets. For example, defining a subject of change as a generic business function rather than 100 individual processes. It's about choosing the right lens for the stage you're in.
Okay, so once you've got your elements identified, you need to think about relationships, how they connect.
Absolutely crucial. Exploring how these potential scope elements relate to each other ensures the completeness and integrity of your scope model. It helps identify dependencies or maybe discover other elements that are involved or impacted.
And there are different ways to show these relationships visually.
Yes, various diagramming techniques. Parent-child relates elements hierarchically. Think of Nexus Global's org chart or sub-processes within a larger customer service process.
Okay.
Function responsibility links a function to the agent or system responsible. Supplier-consumer relates elements by the transmission of info or materials, like data flow diagrams showing customer data moving between systems.
Like the contact center and billing.
Exactly. Then, cause-effect relates elements by logical contingency, identifying chains impacted by a change, like a fishbone diagram for high call volumes.
Finding the root cause.
Right. And finally, emergent relationships describe how elements interact to produce unpredictable results in complex systems. It highlights that interconnectedness.
A really critical element, often overlooked, I think, is assumptions.
Oh, hugely important. The source emphasizes that the validity of the scope model heavily relies on these underlying assumptions.
For our Nexus Global system, what might that be? Assumptions about customer growth.
Could be. Or the stability of existing integrations. Any critical assumptions and their implications must be explicitly stated. No hidden assumptions allowed.
So when all this work is done, what do the scope modeling results actually look like?
It can be a few things. Textual descriptions of elements, including the criteria for why something is in or out, diagrams illustrating the relationships, and matrices depicting dependencies between them. It's a multifaceted output for a complex challenge.
Okay, let's talk usage considerations, starting with the strengths. What does this all mean for someone managing that massive Nexus global system revamp? Why bother?
Well, a well-defined scope model isn't just about drawing lines. It's about forging consensus, real, solid agreement.
Which prevents costly arguments later.
Exactly. Prevents costly legal battles or endless rework. It provides a solid basis for defining contractual obligations, which is huge in business. It helps estimate project effort much more accurately.
And justifying decisions.
Yes. It justifies in-scope or out-of-scope decisions during requirements analysis, makes it easier to explain why something is or isn't being done. And finally, it's invaluable for assessing the completeness and impact of solutions. It gives everyone that shared mental model.
But it's not perfect. What are the limitations?
Right, nothing's perfect. An initial high-level model can sometimes lack the necessary granularity, especially for those boundary elements.
So the scope might not be clear enough at first?
Potentially, yeah. You might not have clear enough identification right out of the gate. Another big challenge. Once a scope is defined, changing it can be incredibly difficult.
Because of politics? Or contracts?
Both. Political reasons, existing contractual obligations. Plus, things change. Wrong initial assumptions, the situation evolves, stakeholder needs change, new tech innovations come along, all can force a revision.
And those complex boundaries, horizons and emergence.
Yeah, traditional scope models often struggle to address those truly complex, shifting boundaries like a horizon, dependent on someone's perspective. It's harder to pin down.
Okay, so we've defined what's in scope, what's out. But how do things actually happen within that scope? How do systems talk to each other?
That brings us nicely to our next technique, sequence diagrams.
Right. These are all about showing those step-by-step interactions, like a choreographed dance of data and actions within a system.
Precisely. The purpose of sequence diagrams is to model the logic of usage scenarios. How? By showing the information passed between objects in a system during the execution of that scenario.
So it's like a flow chart, but specifically for how objects communicate.
Pretty much, yeah. A flowchart for object-to-object communication.
And the description paints a clear picture. A sequence diagram shows how processes or objects interact during a specific scenario.
Right. For our Nexus Global Customer Service System, this might visualize how a customer's call gets routed, how their account info is retrieved, how a new case is logged, step by step.
It shows the classes needed and the messages they pass back and forth.
Exactly. Often triggered by steps in a use case.
Yeah.
And it's important they show how objects interact, but not how they are related structurally. That's a different type of diagram.
Okay, interaction, not relationship. Where are they typically used?
Very common for illustrating interactions between user interface components or different software components talking to each other.
And visually, how do they work?
Imagine information laid out horizontally and vertically. The objects sending messages are boxes at the top, left to right. Each object gets a column with a vertical dashed line going down. That's its lifeline.
Lifeline, okay.
Messages sent between objects are horizontal arrows. The order is top down and generally left to right, starting with the first message near the top left.
Sometimes called event diagrams.
Yes, or event diagrams. And they follow the UML standard, Unified Modeling Language.
Okay, what are the key building blocks here? The elements.
Right. First, you have that lifeline we mentioned. Represents the lifespan of an object during the specific scenario you're modeling. That dashed vertical line showing its active participation.
Got it.
Next up is the activation box. This is a solid rectangle that sits on a lifeline.
What does that show?
It represents the period during which an operation is actually executing. When a call to activate is made, an arrow with a solid arrowhead points to this activation box.
And the lifeline can end.
It can, yeah. Terminate with an X to show an object being destroyed or maybe a process ending.
And central to the diagram is the message itself?
Absolutely. The interaction between two objects, depicted as an arrow from the sender's activation box to the receiver's activation box.
And the arrow has a name.
Yes. The name of the message is placed on top of the arrowed line. Describes the action being taken or the info being passed, like get customer details.
Are there different kinds of messages?
Yes, a couple of key types. A synchronous call is one. It transfers control to the receiving object. The sender literally pauses and waits for a return message before it can continue.
Like waiting for a confirmation.
Exactly. Like a customer service agent at Nexus Global waiting for the system to confirm a credit card transaction before telling the customer it's done. They have to wait.
Okay, synchronous means wait. What's the other type?
Asynchronous call, or signal. This allows the sending object to continue its own processing immediately after sending the signal. It doesn't wait.
So it just fires off the message and moves on.
Pretty much. It can send many signals simultaneously, but it might only accept one signal at a time. Think of the system sending a notification to a manager about a high-priority customer issue. It sends the alert and immediately moves on to the next task without waiting for a direct reply from the manager.
Ah, okay. That difference is important for understanding the flow.
Crucial. It's important for you, the listener, to visualize these distinct interactions to truly grasp the flow of control within a system.
Let's look at the usage considerations for these sequence diagrams. What are the strengths? So what does this all mean for visualizing system flows in our Nexus Global example?
Well, while other diagrams show what happens, sequence diagrams reveal the timing, the chronological dance of data and actions.
And why is that so useful?
Because that's how you spot those insidious timing issues, maybe race conditions or bottlenecks that could bring your entire system to a grinding halt. Things that look fine on a static chart might break down in sequence.
And they're visual, which helps stakeholders.
Definitely. Because they present these interactions visually, the logic can be validated by stakeholders with relative ease, even if they aren't deeply technical. They can often follow the arrows.
And they link to use cases.
Yes, that's another big strength. Use cases, which we'll discuss soon, can be refined into one or more sequence diagrams. This provides added detail, a more in-depth understanding of a business process, takes a high-level user goal, and shows the detailed system steps.
Sounds great. But what about the limitations?
Well, the source points out that time and effort can be wasted creating a complete set of sequence diagrams for every single use case. That might just be overkill.
So you need to be selective.
Be judicious, yes. Apply this level of detail where it adds the most value, usually for complex or critical interactions. Also, these diagrams have historically been used mainly for modeling system flows.
Which makes them seem too technical sometimes.
Potentially, yeah. It can make them seem too technical for other circumstances, possibly alienating less technical stakeholders who might prefer a simpler process flow diagram.
Okay, so from the intricate dance of system interactions, let's zoom out again. Let's talk about the people involved, the stakeholders.
The human element. Crucial.
Our next technique focuses on understanding these critical individuals through stakeholder lists, maps, or personas. This is so important, isn't it? For identifying where your requirements actually come from, and for truly understanding the people involved in any change, especially something big like revamping Nexus Global's customer service.
Indeed. The purpose here is fundamentally about analyzing stakeholders and their characteristics. Why? To ensure all requirement sources are identified and that your engagement and communication decisions are optimal.
So it's about finding everyone and figuring out how to talk to them.
In essence, yes. Stakeholder analysis itself involves identifying all parties who may be affected by a proposed initiative at Nexus Global, or maybe those who share a common business need.
And then you analyze them.
Then you note, consider, and analyze their various characteristics. Things like their level of authority, their attitudes toward the change, or even toward the business analysis work itself, their decision-making power.
And it's not a one-time thing.
No, definitely not. It's an iterative process. You'll revisit this as your understanding evolves throughout the project. People's roles or attitudes can change.
Makes sense. Let's dive into the elements of this analysis. We start with stakeholder lists.
The foundation.
Right. It's all about being thorough and then maybe categorizing those identified. The goal is a comprehensive list. Think of identifying every single department, employee group, external partner that touches Nexus Global's customer service.
Everyone who has a stake.
Exactly. This list is central to all your stakeholder analysis activities, planning elicitation, collaboration, communication. If your list isn't exhaustive.
You run the very real risk of missing critical requirements later on. Someone gets forgotten, their needs aren't met, and suddenly you have a problem.
Been there. Okay, once you have a list, you can create a stakeholder map. These are visual.
Yes, diagrams that visually depict the relationship of stakeholders to the solution and maybe to one another. There are a couple of common forms.
This is the matrix.
Yeah, the first is a stakeholder matrix, often mapping influence against interest. Or impact versus influence?
Can you break that down? The quadrants.
Sure. Imagine a grid. High influence, high impact. These are your key players, like the head of customer service at Nexus Global. Engage them regularly, keep them happy.
Okay, top right.
Then maybe high influence, low impact. Their needs should be met, consult with them, maybe try to increase their interest or understanding of the impact.
Got it. What about low influence?
Low influence, high impact. These are often your supporters, maybe the end users. Get their input, show you value their perspective, keep them informed. And low influence, low impact, generally keep them informed with broader communications. They could be potential goodwill ambassadors.
And this map isn't static.
No, it's iterative.
Yeah.
A stakeholder's position can definitely change as a project evolves. Their influence might grow or their interest might wane.
What's the other type of map? The onion.
The onion
Oh,
diagram.
yeah.
Yeah, it illustrates levels of involvement, like layers of an onion.
How does that work?
You have the solution delivery team at the core. Then outwards, the directly affected organizational units, like the call center staff. Then the wider organization, like IT or marketing. And finally, affected external stakeholders, customers, suppliers, regulators. It gives you a sense of proximity to the solution.
Interesting. Another popular matrix you hear about is the responsibility, RACI matrix.
RACI. Very common in project management, but useful here too. It clarifies roles on specific tasks or deliverables.
Can you quickly define the letters? RACI.
Sure. R is responsible, the people who actually do the work. There can be multiple R's.
Okay.
A is accountable, the person ultimately held accountable for successful completion. And critically, there should be only one accountable person for each task or deliverable. The buck stops there.
Only one A. Got it.
C is consulted stakeholders who provide opinions or information, often subject matter experts, SMEs. This involves two-way communication. You ask them, they tell you. I is informed stakeholders who are kept up to date on progress or decisions, but the communication is generally one way. You tell them they don't necessarily need to respond.
It seems crucial to define those terms clearly for everyone involved.
Absolutely critical.
Yeah.
Everyone needs a consistent understanding of what R, A, C, and I mean within the context of Nexus Global's project.
Okay, the last element mentioned here is personas. Tell us about those.
Personas are a really powerful technique for understanding user groups. A persona is essentially a fictional character or archetype.
Fictional.
Fictional, yes, but based on real research, not just made up. It exemplifies how a typical user interacts with a product or system, like our Nexus Global Customer Service platform.
So you base them on interviews, surveys?
Exactly. Research, not just opinion, to understand user goals, frustrations, behaviors. The persona is then written narratively, almost like a short story, with a name, maybe a picture, key characteristics. The goal is to bring a user to life.
Why is that helpful?
At their heart, personas are empathy machines. They force the development team, the designers, everyone, to step into the user's shoes and constantly ask, why would Sarah, the busy mom, need this feature? It prevents building stuff nobody actually wants, saves precious development cycles.
I like that, empathy machines. Okay, let's review usage considerations, starting with the strengths. What does all this stakeholder analysis mean for planning our Nexus Global revamp?
Well, it clearly identifies the specific people you absolutely must engage in. Requirement solicitation, no guesswork.
Finds your key sources.
Precisely. It also helps the business analyst plan all the necessary collaboration, communication, and facilitation activities to engage every stakeholder group effectively. Tailor the approach.
And it helps track changes.
Yeah, it's incredibly useful for understanding how impacted groups might change over time, allowing for proactive adjustments to your communication or engagement plan.
Seems essential. What are the limitations?
Well, sometimes business analysts who work continuously with the same stable teams might skip formal stakeholder analysis, perceiving minimal change.
Which could be an oversight.
It could be, yeah. Assumptions can be dangerous. Also, assessing subjective information about specific stakeholder representatives, like their true level of influence or their real attitude towards the change, can be complicated.
And maybe a bit politically tricky.
Let's be honest, yes. It can feel politically risky sometimes to make judgments about influence or interest. Needs careful handling.
Okay, so from understanding the people involved, let's dive into understanding the life of an entity within a system. This brings us to state modeling.
Tracking the journey.
Exactly. I invite you, our listener, to think about how things change their status, move through different phases, or transition from one condition to another within any given system. Like a customer service case at Nexus Global moving from open to in progress to resolved, or maybe closed.
Exactly. The core purpose of state modeling is precisely that: to describe and analyze the possible states of an entity, how it changes states, and what happens to it when it is in each of those states.
And an entity here is just anything with a life cycle.
Pretty much. An object or concept within your system that has a life cycle. It comes into existence, goes through changes, and eventually it ends or is archived. And a state within this model is a formal representation of a status.
When do you need this level of formality?
You use it when you need a precise and consistent understanding of an entity that has complex behavior and rules. Simple things might not need it, but complex ones definitely benefit.
So a state model describes several things then. The states, the sequence.
Right. It describes the set of all possible states for an entity, like our Nexus Global Customer Service ticket. It describes the sequence of states it can go through. It describes precisely how it changes from one state to another.
And what triggers those changes?
Yes, the specific events and conditions that cause the entity to change states. And finally, what actions can or must be performed by the entity in each state as it moves through its life cycle.
How does this differ from, say, a process model?
Good question. While a process model might show all the entities involved in a single process, a state model gives you a complementary view. It focuses on one entity, like that ticket, across all the processes that might affect it or use it. It's a deep dive into that single entity's journey.
Ah, okay. The entity's perspective across multiple processes. Let's look at the elements. What's a state in this model?
An entity typically has a finite number of states during its life cycle, though technically it could be in more than one at a time in some complex models. Each state is described with a name, like open or resolved.
And what else defines a state?
The activities that could be performed while in that state. For example, in an open state, a customer service ticket at Nexus Global can be assigned or may be escalated. Also, rules about what must or can be performed or what events it can respond to while in that state.
Can states have substates?
They can, yes. Complex states can be decomposed into substates for more detail.
Okay. Then there's the state transition. This is how it moves between states.
Exactly. It's how an entity changes or transitions from one state to another. This change can be determined by process steps, specific business rules, or even by the information content associated with the entity.
Is it always a straight line, state A to B to C?
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
The sequence isn't always linear. An entity could skip states, it might revert to a previous state, or it could even be recursive, leaving a state and then returning right back to it based on some event.
How is a transition described?
Usually by the event that causes it, like customer accepts resolution, also by the conditions that determine if the entity actually responds to that event, and finally, the actions that occur with that transition.
And we can visualize this with a state diagram.
Yes, the state diagram is the common visual tool. It shows the life cycle of one entity from its beginning state to its end state.
What does it look like?
States are usually shown as rounded rectangles. Transitions are one-directional arrows pointing from the start state to the destination state.
Are the arrows labeled?
Optionally, yes. Labeled with the event causing the change, and sometimes the conditions and actions too. And there are special symbols to mark the initial state where the entity comes into existence and the final state when it's discarded or archived.
Okay. Are diagrams the only way? You mentioned state tables.
Right. A state table is another option. It's basically a two-dimensional matrix showing states and the transitions between them.
How is that useful?
It can be an alternative or maybe a precursor or even a complement to a state diagram. It's often a simple way to start a state model, helping to elicit the state names and event names directly from subject matter experts. Each row typically shows a starting state, the transition event, and the resulting end state. Simple structure.
Let's look at usage considerations. What are the strengths? What does this rigorous modeling mean for clarity in managing customer service cases at Nexus Global?
Well, state models are excellent for identifying specific business rules and information attributes that apply only when the entity is in a certain state. For example, a rule that says a ticket in the pending customer response state must have a last contact date attribute filled in. They also clearly identify and describe the specific activities that apply to the entity at different points in its life.
And communication.
Crucially, yes. They're a much more effective documentation and communication tool than just plain text, especially if the entity has more than just a few states, transitions, and complex governing conditions. It makes the logic visible.
Makes sense. What about the limitations?
Well, state modeling is usually only used for information entities perceived as complex. For simple entities with only 2 or 3 states, the time and effort required might not be worth it.
So only for the tricky ones?
Generally, yes. Also, while it appears simple at the start, achieving consensus among domain subject matter experts about precise details, every state, every transition, every condition, can be surprisingly difficult and time-consuming. People might disagree on the nuances.
And it requires precision.
A high degree of precision, yes. And that can make some practitioners and SMEs uncomfortable if they're used to more ambiguous descriptions. It forces clarity, which isn't always easy.
Okay. From the precise formal world of state models, let's shift gears. Let's explore a technique for gathering broad input from many people efficiently. Surveys or questionnaires.
Casting a wider net.
Exactly. These are incredibly powerful tools for data collection from groups, especially for something like understanding customer sentiment about Nexus Global's current service, maybe before the revamp.
That's right. The core purpose of a survey or questionnaire is to elicit business analysis information. This could be insights about customers, products, work practices, attitudes, a whole range of things.
And the key is getting this from a group.
From a group of people, yes, in a structured way, and usually in a relatively short period of time compared to other methods like interviews.
How do they work, fundamentally?
They essentially present a set of questions to stakeholders or subject matter experts. Then their responses are collected and analyzed to build knowledge about whatever subject you're investigating.
And you can deliver them in different ways.
Many ways. Written form, maybe in person, over the phone, or increasingly using technology online survey tools are everywhere now.
Okay, let's unpack the difference between the two main types of questions you'll encounter. First, close-ended questions.
Right. The predefined answers.
Exactly. Here, the respondent is asked to select from a list of predefined responses. Could be a simple yes-no, multiple choice, ranking options, or indicating agreement on a scale.
Like a satisfaction rating.
Perfect example. Asking Nexus Global customers to rate their satisfaction on a scale of 1 to 5. These are especially useful when you have a good idea of the likely range of responses.
And the big advantage.
Much easier to analyze quantitatively. You can assign numbers, calculate averages, see trends easily because the data is structured.
Okay, that's close-ended. What about open-ended?
These ask the respondent to answer in their own words. Free-form text. No predefined options.
When would you use those?
They're incredibly useful when you know the general issues you want to explore, but you don't know the full range of potential responses or opinions. Like asking, what could we do better?
Exactly. What's the one thing you would change about Nexus Global's customer service? Open-ended questions can yield much more detail, richer insights, a wider range of ideas you hadn't thought of.
But they're harder to analyze.
Definitely harder and more time-consuming to categorize, quantify, and summarize. The data is unstructured, often subjective. You need to read through and identify themes manually or using text analysis tools.
And for both types, the wording is crucial.
Absolutely critical. Questions should always be asked in neutral language, structured and sequenced carefully so they don't bias the respondent or influence them to give a perceived correct or desirable answer. Avoid leading questions.
Got it. Now, let's look at the elements for using surveys effectively. It's not just about writing questions, is it? Let's call it effective survey execution.
Right, it starts way before you send it out. Thorough preparation is key. Define a clear objective. What do you need to learn? Identify your target group. Who are you asking?
Like needing a representative sample of Nexus Global customers?
Exactly. Maybe using statistical sampling if the group is large, considering demographics. Then select the right question types. Decide on distribution and collection methods, online, paper, etc. Set a target response level and timeline.
And testing. You mentioned testing.
Crucial. Always test the survey on a small group first. Pilot testing helps catch confusing questions, technical glitches, typos before it goes out widely. You might even do pre- or post-survey interviews with a few people for deeper context.
Okay. After prep and testing, you distribute the survey or questionnaire.
Yes. And when you do, clearly communicate the objectives, explain how the results will be used, state any confidentiality arrangements. The method you choose for distribution depends on factors like urgency, security needs, geographic distribution of your audience.
And once the responses come back,
Then you document the results. This involves collating all the responses, summarizing them, evaluating the data to identify patterns and themes, maybe formulating categories for open-ended answers, and breaking down the data perhaps by different respondent groups.
transforming raw data into insights.
That's the goal, turning answers into actionable knowledge.
Let's turn to usage considerations, starting with the strengths. What does this all mean for efficiency when getting feedback on Nexus Global's customer service? Why choose surveys?
Well, they are generally quick and relatively inexpensive to administer compared to, say, focus groups or hundreds of interviews.
Reach a large audience easily.
Much easier to collect information from a larger audience, which is critical for large customer bases or employee groups. They also don't typically demand a huge time commitment from respondents, which usually helps boost response rates.
Good for dispersed stakeholders, too.
Incredibly effective and efficient when your stakeholders are geographically spread out. An online survey reaches everyone instantly. And finally, close-ended questions give you that quantitative data for stats, while open-ended questions can yield those rich, qualitative insights and opinions.
Seems very useful. What about the limitations?
Well, to achieve truly unbiased and statistically significant results, when surveying only a subset of potential respondents, you often need specialized skills in statistical sampling methods. Getting the sample right matters.
Okay. Requires some expertise.
It can, yes. There's also always the risk of low response rates. If too few people reply, the reliability of your results can be limited. You might not have a representative view.
And analyzing those open-ended questions.
As we said, it requires a much heavier analysis lift. It can be very time-consuming. Also, ambiguous or poorly worded questions can lead to unanswered questions or, worse, incorrectly answered ones, skewing your data.
And you might need follow-up.
Sometimes, yes. Depending on the initial answers, you might realize you need follow-up questions or even more survey iterations to get the clarity you need. It's not always a one-shot deal.
Okay. From gathering information from many individuals, let's shift perspective again. Let's look at a high-level strategic evaluation tool, SWOT analysis.
The classic SWOT.
Simple, but incredibly powerful, isn't it? Especially for something like evaluating Nexus Global's overall position in the competitive customer service landscape.
Absolutely. The purpose of SWOT analysis is straightforward: to evaluate an organization's internal strengths and weaknesses and its external opportunities and threats. SWOT.
So it's about looking inside and outside.
Exactly. It's used to identify the overall state of an organization, both internally and externally. The key is the language used. It should always be brief, specific, realistic, and ideally supported by some evidence, not just vague opinions.
And you can use it at different levels.
Yes, any scale, really. Right. From the entire Nexus Global enterprise down to a single project, a specific product line, or even an individual reflecting on their own career. The goal is to gain a clear understanding of how current conditions might impact future ones.
The source lists quite a few uses for SWOT: evaluating the environment, sharing info,
Identifying the best options to meet needs, flagging potential barriers to success, helping create action plans to overcome them,
adjusting plans, identifying strengths for strategy.
developing success criteria, identifying weaknesses that could undermine goals, developing strategies to address threats. It's truly a versatile tool for strategic thinking and planning.
Let's break down the elements of the acronym, SWOT.
Okay. S is strengths. These are internal factors, things Nexus Global does well.
Like,
Maybe highly experienced customer service personnel, effective internal training programs, a strong brand reputation, robust existing IT infrastructure. Things they control and are good at.
then W is weaknesses, also internal.
Also internal, yes. These are actions or functions Nexus Global does poorly, or maybe not at all, things they lack or struggle with.
Examples for Nexus Global:
Perhaps outdated CRM software, maybe a lack of self-service options for customers compared to competitors, high staff turnover in the call center, internal problems.
Okay, S and W are internal, O and T are external.
Correct. O is opportunities. These are external factors that Nexus Global may be able to take advantage of. Things happening outside the company they could leverage.
Us.
New emerging AI technologies for customer support they could adopt, shifts in competitor offerings, creating a market gap they could fill, new regulations that happen to favor their operational model, favorable external conditions.
And finally, T is threats, also external.
Yes, external factors that could negatively affect Nexus Global, things outside their control that pose a risk.
Like new competition.
It's exactly a disruptive new competitor entering the market with superior service, an economic downturn impacting customer spending and call volumes, data security breaches faced by other companies that make customers more wary and demand higher security from Nexus Global, unfavorable external conditions.
Interestingly, the source suggests maybe starting a SWOT analysis with O and T.
Yeah, it suggests that sometimes starting with opportunities and threats helps set the external context before you start identifying your internal strengths and weaknesses relative to that context. It can frame the internal analysis better.
Makes sense. And this is often shown in a matrix, the SWOT matrix.
Very commonly, yes. Visualized as a 2x2 grid. Usually strengths and weaknesses across the top, opportunities and threats down the side.
And the matrix helps you develop strategies.
That's the power of it. It prompts strategic thinking by combining the factors. So strategies using strengths to exploit opportunities. That's often straightforward.
Like using Nexus Global's experienced staff to implement new AI tools.
Perfect example. Then ST strategies. Using strengths to ward off threats. Maybe even turn threats into opportunities.
Like using a strong security posture to reassure customers worried about industry breaches.
Exactly. Then you have WO strategies, using an opportunity to eliminate or mitigate a weakness.
Like using new tech to overcome outdated software. We're
Hmm.
developing new capabilities.
Right, finding external solutions for internal problems. And finally, WT strategies, these are often defensive, restructuring to avoid a threat, minimizing weaknesses and threats simultaneously. Sometimes, in the worst case, considering leaving a market altogether if the weaknesses and threats are overwhelming.
Those sound like tough decisions.
They can be, yeah.
Yeah.
WT strategies often address the most challenging scenarios.
Okay, looking at usage considerations, let's start with the strengths. What does this SWOT analysis really mean for strategic thinking at Nexus Global? Why is it valuable?
Well, it's a fantastic tool to aid in understanding the organization, its products like customer service, specific processes, or even key stakeholders. It helps bring clarity.
Cuts through the noise.
Yes, it enables business analysts and leaders to direct stakeholders' focus to the factors that are truly important to the business, separating the signal from the noise.
What are the limitations, though?
A key one is that the results of a SWOT analysis typically provide a pretty high-level view.
So it's a starting point.
Often, yes. More detailed analysis is usually needed to really dig into the specifics and formulate concrete action plans. Also, if a clear context isn't defined for the SWOT analysis from the outset, like are we analyzing the whole company or just the European customer service division, the results can become unfocused.
You get irrelevant factors.
Exactly. You might get factors listed that aren't truly relevant to the specific situation you're trying to address, which dilutes the utility of the analysis. Focus is key.
Okay. From high-level strategy, let's zoom back in. Let's look at how we describe detailed interactions with a solution. This brings us to use cases and scenarios.
Right. Getting specific about user interactions.
These techniques really focus on how a person or maybe another system interacts with a proposed solution to achieve a specific goal. Like a customer interacting with Nexus Global's new online support portal to update their address.
That's exactly right. The core purpose is to describe precisely how a person or another system interacts with a solution being modeled to achieve a specific goal.
So it's all about the interaction for a goal.
Yes. Use cases detail these interactions between what's called the primary actor, the one initiating the goal, like our customer, the solution itself, and any secondary actors that might be needed to help achieve that goal.
Like maybe a validation system.
Could be, yeah. They are usually triggered by the primary actor, but sometimes by another system or an external event like a scheduled task.
And they describe different paths, success and failure.
Exactly. Use cases define the possible outcomes. They outline a primary or basic flow, the most direct, happy path to success, and then alternative flows for maybe less common but still successful paths, or exception flows for when things go wrong and the goal can't be achieved.
And the perspective is important.
Crucial. They are written from the actor's point of view, describing what the actor does and what the system does in response. Importantly, they avoid describing the internal workings or design of the solution. It's a black box view from the outside.
And there are diagrams, too. Use case diagrams.
Often, yes. These are graphical representations showing the relationships between the actors and the various use cases a solution supports. Gives you a quick overview of the system's functionality.
Is there a difference between business and system use cases?
Yes, a distinction is often made. Business use cases describe how actors interact with a business process or function, perhaps more high level, like manage customer inquiry. System use cases focus specifically on the interaction with a software application, like log new service ticket in the Nexus Global CRM.
Okay. And what's a scenario then? Is it the same as a use case?
Not quite. A scenario describes just one specific path or way an actor can accomplish the goal through the use case. It's a single sequence of steps. A single use case can actually encompass several different scenarios: the main success scenario, various alternative scenarios, and exception scenarios.
So a use case is the whole story. Scenarios are individual
That's
chapters.
a good way to put it. Let's dive into the elements. The source notes there's no single universal format, but many common components exist.
Like the use case diagram we mentioned.
Right. Visually depicts the scope of the solution, showing the actors, often stick figures, the use cases, usually ovals, and the relationships between them.
What kind of relationships are shown?
Well, associations are the basic lines connecting actors to the use cases they interact with, showing they have access to that functionality. Then you can have relationships between use cases themselves. Two key types here.
Okay.
First is extend. This allows you to insert additional optional behavior into a base use case. The key is the extended use case, the base one, must be fully functional on its own. It doesn't need the extending one.
When would you use extend?
Often used for adding new requirements or handling optional variations, like adding an optional offer discount step that extends a main resolve customer complaint use case.
Yeah.
The complaint can be resolved without the discount.
Okay. And the second type of relationship?
Include. This is where one use case makes use of functionality that's present in another separate use case. The included use case doesn't necessarily need to be a complete standalone use case triggered by an actor itself.
Why use include?
Commonly used for shared functionality that multiple use cases might need, avoiding repetition, or to abstract out complex logic into a reusable block.
Like logging in.
Exactly. Authenticate user might be an included use case that both log new service ticket and check account status need to perform. They both include the authentication steps.
Makes sense. Okay, beyond diagrams, the real detail is in the use case description. What goes in there?
Right, the text description starts with a unique name, typically that verb noun phrase like withdraw cash or update shipping address. Then a goal, a brief summary of the successful outcome from the primary actor's perspective. What are they trying to achieve?
Like customer successfully changes their shipping address.
Perfect. Next are the actors involved, any person or system external to the solution that interacts. Each gets a unique name representing their role. The one who starts it is the primary actor, others are secondary.
Then preconditions. What are those?
These are facts or conditions that must be true before the use case can even begin. They act as constraints. Importantly, they aren't usually tested within the flow itself. They're assumed true.
Like customer must be logged in.
Exactly. That must be true before they can update their address.
Then there's the trigger.
What starts the use case?
Yes, the event that initiates the flow of events. Most commonly, it's an action by the primary actor, like clicking a button. But it could also be a temporal event, like the system automatically running an end-of-day report at a specific time. Okay. And the core is the flow of events.
That's the heart of it, yes. The step-by-step description of the interactions performed by both the actors and the solution. This is usually broken down.
Into the main path and others.
Right. The basic or main success flow the shortest, simplest path to achieving the goal. Then alternative flows for other ways to succeed, maybe involving optional steps. And exception flows describing what happens when the goal cannot be achieved, handling errors or failures.
And finally, post-conditions or guarantees. What happens at the very end?
These are facts that must be true once the use case is complete, regardless of which flow is taken, success or failure.
Right.
A success guarantee describes post-conditions for a successful execution, e.g., shipping address updated in database and confirmation sent. Minimal guarantees specify conditions that are true even if the goal wasn't achieved, perhaps covering things like security logging or ensuring data consistency wasn't compromised during a failed attempt.
Okay, comprehensive. Let's look at usage considerations. Strengths first. What does this detail mean for clarity in designing our Nexus global system?
Use case diagrams are great for clarifying scope and giving a high-level understanding of requirements quickly.
And the descriptions.
Their narrative flow makes use case descriptions easily understood by stakeholders, even non-technical ones. They bridge that gap between business needs and system functions. Including the goal clearly articulates the business value. And they provide a clear articulation of the functional behavior the system needs to provide. Very testable.
Sounds good. What about the limitations?
Well, the very flexibility of the description format can be a downside. Sometimes people embed information that might be better captured using other techniques.
Like UI details or business rules.
Exactly. User interface details, specific non-functional requirements, complex business rules. These probably shouldn't be directly in the use case flow itself, but managed separately and linked. Decisions and the business rules defining them, especially, should be separate.
Okay. Other limits.
There's a risk of capturing inappropriate or unnecessary levels of detail if you try to show every single tiny step or interaction. It can become bloated. And a significant point, use cases intentionally don't relate to the internal design or architecture of the solution.
Why is that a limitation?
It means considerable effort might be required during development to map the abstract use case steps to the concrete software components and architecture. It's not a direct blueprint for coding.
Got it. Okay. From detailed use cases, let's explore a more agile, maybe more concise way to express stakeholder needs, user stories.
Ah, yes. central to many Agile approaches.
These are small, concise statements focused squarely on delivering value, right? Perfect for the iterative nature of modern software development, maybe how Nexus Global wants to build its new features.
Absolutely. The purpose of a user story is really to represent a small, concise statement of functionality or quality needed to deliver value to a specific stakeholder.
Small and value focused.
Key points, yes. They're excellent for capturing needs and defining features using short, simple documentation. They serve as a powerful basis for identifying requirements, but also for prioritizing them, estimating the effort involved, and planning the solution delivery in small increments.
And the focus is always on the who, what, why.
Primarily, yes. Emphasizing stakeholder value. Who needs it, what do they need, and why do they need it? This structure also promotes conversation and helps group-related functional requirements together.
User stories seem really versatile. The source lists uses like capturing needs, prioritizing, estimating, planning.
Generating acceptance tests, measuring the delivery of value, tracing requirements back to needs, sparking additional analysis, even project management and reporting. They really touch many facets of the development lifecycle, especially in Agile contexts like Nexus Global might use.
Let's break down the elements. What makes up a user story? Is there a strict format?
Well, there's no single mandatory structure, but common elements exist. An optional title is often included, describing the activity the stakeholder wants to carry out, usually an active verb goal phrase, similar to a use case name.
Like search knowledge base.
Exactly. But the core is the statement of value. While not mandatory, the most popular format you'll see is, as a who, I need to what, so that why.
Can you give the Nexus Global example again?
Sure. As a customer, the who, I need to search the knowledge base, the what, so that I can find answers to my questions quickly without calling support the why value. Another common format, especially for defining tests, is given, when, then.
Okay. But the story itself isn't the whole requirement.
Absolutely not. A crucial element of user stories is the conversation. The written story itself is deliberately brief. It's meant as an invitation, a placeholder for further discussion and exploration between the development team, the product owner, and stakeholders.
So the details emerge through talking.
Precisely. The information in the story is supplemented through these ongoing conversations and often additional modeling, like sketches or diagrams, as the story gets closer to being delivered. It's a prompt for collaboration.
And finally, acceptance criteria.
Vital. These define the boundaries of the story. They help the team understand exactly what the solution must do, what conditions must be met for the story to be considered done, and for the intended value to be delivered.
They clarify completion.
Yes, they make it testable, often written as a checklist or using that given when then format, and they might be supplemented by other analysis models as needed for clarity.
Okay, let's look at usage considerations, starting with the strengths. What does this approach mean for Agile development at Nexus Global? Why are stories so popular?
Well, they are incredibly easy for stakeholders to understand. They're written from the user's perspective, usually in plain language, easy to grasp.
And easy to create.
They can be developed through various elicitation techniques, workshops, interviews, observation. They maintain that sharp focus on value to stakeholders, ensuring that what gets built actually matters to someone.
And they help understanding.
Significantly. They enhance shared understanding of the business domain through that collaborative definition and ongoing conversation. And because they're typically tied to small, implementable, and testable slices of functionality.
You can deliver faster.
Exactly. They facilitate rapid delivery and frequent customer feedback, which is absolutely key in Agile environments. Build a little, test a little, learn a little.
Sounds very positive. What about the limitations?
Well, it's important to remember their primary intent. User stories are generally intended as a tool for short-term capture and prioritization of requirements, not necessarily for long-term knowledge retention or highly detailed analysis.
So they're not a full specification.
No, and neglecting that principle can lead to issues. That conversational approach, relying on discussion, can be challenging for teams or stakeholders if they expect all answers and detailed specs up front. That's just not the story's purpose.
What about the big picture?
That's another risk. There's a potential risk of losing sight of the overall goal or the big picture if stories aren't traced back to higher-level goals or epics, or if they aren't supplemented with other analysis artifacts like process models or context diagrams. You need to connect the dots.
And documentation needs.
Finally, yes, user stories alone may not provide enough documentation to meet certain governance needs or create a sufficient throughline line for future maintenance work, or satisfy all stakeholder expectations for formal documentation. additional docs might still be required.
Okay. So, from internal development using user stories, let's consider how organizations evaluate external partners. Our next technique, vendor assessment.
Right, looking outwards.
This is incredibly important when your solutions involve third parties. Like, if Nexus Global is looking to adopt a new cloud-based CRM platform from an outside company, you need to choose wisely.
Indeed. The purpose of a vendor assessment is exactly that, to rigorously assess a vendor's ability to meet commitments regarding the delivery and, just as importantly, the consistent provision of a product or service over time.
When is this needed? Obviously, when buying software.
Yes, but also anytime solutions are provided, even in part by external vendors. Maybe they're involved in design, construction, implementation, ongoing maintenance, or maybe the entire solution is outsourced to them.
And you need to check specific things about the vendor.
Absolutely. You might need to ensure they meet specific requirements like financial security and stability, adequate staffing levels, compliance with industry standards or regulations, and having appropriately skilled staff available.
What about service levels?
Often defined via non-functional requirements. Service level agreements, SLAs, are key. You might also require due diligence checks or independent certifications to verify their capabilities.
How formal does this assessment need to be?
It can vary widely. It might be a very formal process, like Nexus Global issuing a detailed Request for Information, RFI, or Request for Proposal, RFP, to evaluate potential CRM vendors.
Or it could be informal.
Could be. As informal as checking references or relying on word-of-mouth recommendations, especially for smaller engagements, the level of formality is usually influenced by the organization's own standards, the complexity of the initiative, and how critical the solution is to the business. A core CRM system likely needs more formality than a minor utility tool.
Okay, let's delve into the elements of assessment. What are you actually looking at?
First, often knowledge and expertise. A primary reason for using third-party vendors is frequently to gain specialized knowledge or expertise not available internally.
Like Nexus Global, seeking a vendor known for deep AI integration in their CRM.
Exactly. And you might also assess their ability and willingness to transfer that knowledge to your own enterprise staff over time, building internal capability.
Then there are licensing and pricing models. Always tricky.
Crucial, yes. Solutions with seemingly similar functionality can differ greatly in their pricing structures per user, per transaction, tiered features, etc. This requires careful analysis.
You need to model usage.
Yes. Analyze various usage scenarios relevant to your organization to determine which vendor's option will provide the best cost-benefit ratio over the long term. It's not just the initial sticker price, it's the total cost of ownership.
What about the vendor market position? Does that matter?
It often does. It's important to compare each potential vendor against their competitors. Where do they stand? Is their technology cutting edge or lagging? You also need to decide which market players your organization feels comfortable engaging with.
And their customer community?
How the vendor's existing customer community aligns with your organization's profile can be a factor. Are there other customers similar to Nexus Global? And understanding the dynamics of the vendor's market position is vital, especially if you're looking to establish a long-term strategic partnership. Are they growing, stable, likely to be acquired?
Lots to consider there. Then the contract itself, terms and conditions.
Absolutely critical. This covers the continuity and integrity of the products and services. You need to scrutinize the details.
Like what specifically?
Things like do the vendor's licensing terms, intellectual property rights, or maybe their underlying technology infrastructure pose challenges if Nexus Global later decides to transition to another supplier. Avoid vendor lock-in if possible.
Data protection, customization.
Yes. Considerations include the vendor's responsibility for protecting your confidential data, huge these days, the terms under which product customizations can be made, and who owned them, and the availability of a regular update schedule and a clear roadmap of planned future features for that new CRM. You want to know where they're going.
And finally, vendor experience, reputation, and stability. Basically, can you trust them?
That's the heart of it. Checking a vendor's past performance with other similar customers provides valuable insight into how likely they are to actually meet their contractual obligations. Talk to references.
Check their track record.
Exactly. You should also evaluate their conformance and compliance with relevant external standards for quality, security, professionalism, like ISO certifications. And it's wise to ensure steps are in place to mitigate risks if a vendor runs into financial difficulties. What happens if they go bankrupt? Can Nexus Global still maintain and enhance the solution? Escrow agreements, for instance.
Okay. Turning to usage considerations, let's examine the strengths. What does all this due diligence mean for long-term success when choosing that new CRM for Nexus Global?
Well, simply put, a thorough vendor assessment significantly increases the chances that your organization will develop a productive, fair relationship with a suitable and reliable vendor.
Leads to better partnerships.
Yes, and that, in turn, improves long-term satisfaction with your vendor selection decision. It helps prevent buyer's remorse, costly vendor lock-in, or service disruptions down the line. It's an investment upfront to save pain later.
What are the limitations, though?
It can be quite consuming in terms of time and resources, particularly for complex solutions requiring formal RFPs and detailed evaluations. It's not a trivial effort.
And it's not foolproof.
No, it's important to remember that even the most rigorous assessment doesn't completely prevent the risk of failure. Partnerships evolve. Vendor staff change. Market conditions shift. It's not a guarantee forever. And of course, subjectivity can sometimes bias the evaluation outcome.
How so?
Personal preferences, existing relationships, unclear criteria. These can sway the decision. That's why having clear, objective criteria and multiple perspectives involved in the assessment is crucial to mitigate bias.
Right. Okay, our final technique for today's deep dive brings us back inside the organization. It's a powerful method for internal collaboration. Workshops.
Getting people together in a room.
Or virtual room these days.
Exactly. These are all about bringing people together for a common goal, something absolutely critical for aligning the many teams in Nexus Global that might be involved in that big customer service revamp. Precisely. The core purpose of workshops is just that, to bring stakeholders together to collaborate on achieving a predefined goal. Simple concept, powerful execution.
So it's a focused event.
Yes, a focused event attended by key stakeholders and subject matter experts, SMEs, usually for a concentrated period of time. Could be a few hours, could be a few days.
And they can be used for lots of things.
Oh, a huge variety of purposes. Planning workshops, analysis, design, scoping sessions, requirements, elicitation workshops, modeling sessions, brainstorming and idea generation, trying to reach consensus on a tricky topic, or maybe reviewing requirements or designs that have been drafted. Very flexible.
What are the key characteristics that make it a workshop and not just another meeting?
Good question. Key characteristics usually include having a representative group of stakeholders present, a clearly defined goal or objective for the session. Interactive and collaborative work people aren't just listening, they're actively participating. Producing a defined work product, you walk out with something tangible, like a list of prioritized requirements, a draft model, a set of decisions, and crucially, having a facilitator.
The facilitator is important.
Very. Workshops are great because they promote trust, mutual understanding, and strong communication among the stakeholders. They can produce high-quality deliverables quickly because everyone is focused together. Ideally, an experienced, neutral facilitator leads the workshop.
Neutral meaning not biased towards a particular outcome.
Exactly. Someone skilled in group dynamics, keeping discussion on track, ensuring everyone participates. There's often also a scribe to document decisions and issues. The business analyst might play the role of facilitator or scribe, or sometimes participate as an SME.
Can being an SME and facilitator cause issues?
It can sometimes cause confusion regarding their role or perceived neutrality, for often it's better to have distinct roles if possible.
Okay. Let's talk about the elements of effective workshop execution. It starts with preparation, right? You can't just throw people in a room.
Absolutely not. Thorough preparation is vital. Business analysts need to define the workshop's purpose and desired outcomes clearly. Identify who needs to be there, the key stakeholders. Select the facilitator and scribe. Create a detailed agenda with timings.
What else?
Determine how outputs will be captured, flip charts, whiteboard photos, digital tools. Schedule a session, considering everyone's availability, which can be the hardest part. Arrange room logistics, equipment. Send any necessary pre-reading materials well in advance so people come prepared. And sometimes, conducting brief pre-workshop interviews can help surface issues or prime participants.
That sounds like a lot of work just to get ready.
It is. Think of the effort involved in getting Nexus Global's IT leadership, sales VPs, and customer service directors all in one room, focused for a few hours. Preparation is absolutely make or break for success.
Okay. During the workshop itself, clearly defined workshop roles are crucial.
Yes. The sponsor usually holds ultimate accountability for the outcome, even if they are in the room the whole time. The facilitator is key, sets that professional, objective tone, introduces goals, enforces ground rules, keeps activities focused, facilitates decision-making and conflict resolution, and makes sure everyone gets a chance to contribute, not just the loudest voices.
And the scribe.
The scribe diligently documents all decisions made, action items assigned, and any outstanding issues that need further follow-up. An optional timekeeper helps keep track of time spent on each agenda item to stay on schedule.
And the participants, what's their job?
Their job is to actively participate, provide input based on their expertise, listen respectfully to other views, and discuss issues openly and without bias, focusing on the workshop goals.
They need to be engaged.
How do you actually conduct the workshop effectively? Facilitators typically start with a clear statement of the purpose and desired outcomes, ensuring everyone understands why they're there. Sometimes an easy icebreaker activity can help people relax and get comfortable working together, especially if they don't know each other well.
And ground rules.
Establishing agreed-upon ground rules early on is highly effective. Things like respect all opinions, everyone contributes, limit side conversations or off-topic tangents, focus on the issues, not the people, agree beforehand on how decisions will be made, for example, consensus, majority vote, sponsor decides.
And the facilitator keeps things moving.
That's their main job during the session. Maintain focus, constantly validating activities against the workshop's purpose and stated outcomes. Gently steer conversations back on track if they stray.
Okay, and after the workshop ends, it's not over then.
Definitely not. The post-workshop wrap-up is critical. After the session, the facilitator or BA follows up on any open action items that were recorded. They complete and clean up all the documentation notes, models, decision logs, and then they distribute this information promptly to all the attendees and any other stakeholders who need to be kept informed.
Closes the loop.
Exactly. Ensures accountability and allows the collaborative work to continue based on what was agreed.
Right. Now for the usage considerations, let's look at the strengths. What does this workshop approach mean for effective meetings and collaboration at Nexus Global? Why are they better than just, say, email chains?
Workshops are incredibly powerful for achieving agreement and buy-in on complex topics in a relatively short period of time. Getting everyone together accelerates decision-making.
And collaboration.
They provide a unique environment for stakeholders to truly collaborate, make decisions collectively, and gain a mutual understanding that's often very difficult to achieve through sequential interviews or asynchronous communication like email. You get synergy.
Cheaper sometimes too.
Often, yes. The costs can be lower than performing multiple rounds of individual interviews to gather the same information. And critically, feedback on issues, ideas, or proposed decisions can be provided immediately by the participants in the room.
Real-time adjustments.
Yes, allowing for real-time clarification, adjustments, and faster progress overall. The feedback loop is instant.
Sounds almost magical, but there must be limitations.
Of course. Nothing's perfect. Stakeholder availability can make scheduling a workshop incredibly difficult, especially when you need key, very busy individuals from various departments across Nexus Global, all free at the same time.
The scheduling nightmare.
It can be, yes. Also, the success of the workshop is highly dependent on the expertise of the facilitator. A poor facilitator can lead to chaos or lack of results, and also on the knowledge, engagement, and willingness of the participants to collaborate constructively.
And the number of people matters.
It does. You have to find that sweet spot. Too many participants can slow down the process, make it hard for everyone to contribute, and reaching consensus becomes harder. Too few participants risks overlooking important needs or issues, potentially leading to unrepresentative decisions that lack broad support. Finding the right size and mix is key. #OutreDotre.
Wow. Okay, what a journey through these 10 techniques. We've covered a lot of ground.
We certainly have 10 powerful tools.
From defining clear boundaries with scope modeling, to mapping those step-by-step interactions with sequence diagrams, then understanding the crucial human element through stakeholder lists, maps, or personas.
Then charting the life of an entity with state modeling, efficiently gathering wide input using surveys or questionnaires, gaining those high-level strategic insights with SWOT analysis.
Right. And detailing solution interactions with use cases and scenarios, embracing agile value with user stories, ensuring external reliability with vendor assessment, and finally, driving that vital internal collaboration through workshops. Phew.
It's quite the toolkit. And what's fascinating, I think, is that each of these techniques, while distinct, is really a tool in your arsenal to reduce uncertainty, gain clarity, and ultimately help ensure successful outcomes.
regardless of the specific challenge.
Whether you're dealing with project boundaries, complex system interactions, the nuanced dynamics of human beings, or high-level strategic evaluations, these methods provide a structured approach. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's really about being intentionally clear in a world drowning in information overload.
Choosing the right lens for the job.
Exactly. Choosing the right lens, the right tool for the challenge at hand.
Absolutely. So, as you, our listener, go about your week, maybe consider which of these techniques, even just one, could unlock a new level of clarity or collaboration in your own work, or perhaps just in some curious exploration you're doing.
How could one apply?
Yeah. How might just one of these deep dives into a technique prevent a future headache for you, help you streamline a process, or maybe spark a completely new aha moment?
It's about applying the knowledge. We encourage you to keep questioning, keep learning, and thoughtfully apply these ideas where they fit.
Until next time, keep digging deeper.